It's 7:21 a.m. at the Wheeling and Lake Erie's State Line Tunnel on the railroad's Rook subdivision. At the suggestion of my mom, I had driven overnight from Altoona to the Steel City for a day of train chasing, a good portion of which I wanted to spend on the W&LE. I had deduced that their morning eastbound for Pittsburgh, train 218, can be seen anytime between 7 and 10 a.m. coming into the Keystone State. I decided to err on the side of safety arriving trackside prior to sunup, and eventually decided to relocate a couple miles east into the town of Avella. I set up in the woods overlooking Cross Creek and waited riverside for another 3 hours. Just as I was giving up hope at 10:20 a.m., the invigorating sound of notched-out EMDs rang through the morning mist. Train 218 was powered by both of W&LE's gray SD40-2s, a ghostly scheme worn in their previous life as leaser engines. The pair is bringing 102 mixed cars into Pittsburgh from Brewster, Ohio, as 218 traverses the railroad's main artery into Pennsylvania on a daily basis. The Rook subdivision was to be my home for the next few hours, as I'd follow trains between Avella and Rook Yard, situated on the southwest side of Pittsburgh. The other end of the Rook Yard spits out tracks to Connellsville, although I favored the Rook sub for its picturesque landscapes and dependable train action. I'd been wanting to see the Wheeling for years, and was quite excited that my day was starting off on a good note. The railroad treated me to a monster eastbound, with 1 buffer car, 35 fuel tanks, 8 shorty hoppers, and 58 open-top coke hoppers. The tanks are bound for Westland, home to a giant Mark West Energy fuel plant that receives daily service from the W&LE. I'm not quite sure where the 2-bay hoppers are going, but the large cut of coke cars are likely bound for Connellsville, with a good chunk of them lettered for the Wheeling and Lake Erie. The chase was on after Avella, although being new to the territory certainly gave me a run for my money. That's all part of the fun, however, and I was psyched to be at my next location 5 miles closer to Rook with no more than 8 seconds to spare. The Rook sub was serving me well, as I was more than happy to be chasing a bucket list short line through the peaceful Pennsylvania countryside. Driving in between locations was just as fun, although it was cold enough for this Floridian to break out the Bass Pro gloves. While doing so, it dawned on me that I hadn't heard any radio chatter from 218 since I'd left Avella, but I knew for sure that I was ahead of him. My next stop was outside of Brown's Orchard and Cider Company, a lovely little farm right smack in the middle of nowhere. I arrived well ahead of 218 and used my spare time to look through the car for my scanner. My efforts were in vain, and to this day I am still certain that scanner is laying on the bank of Cross Creek back in Avella. Even without my radio ears, it was easy to tell when 218 was approaching, as its 6,000 horses did not specialize in subtlety. From Brown's Orchard, I knew the trip into the city via rail is much more direct than over the road. Combined with 218's quick clip, I knew this was to be my last run-by of the eastbound freight, so I figured I'd watch the train in full. I was correct. The 20-mile drive to Rook Yard proved to be much slower than the train's 14-mile trip, although I quite enjoyed the drive through the mountains. Once in the city, I found a dead-end road right off the highway, which conveniently looked straight out to the Rook sub. 218 has arrived at Rook Yard as its crew worked to clear the single-track lead, at which point the second W&LE train of the morning would depart. Piecing this together, I ran around to the north side where I could camp out and wait for train 643, a daily turn out of Rook bound for Westland. While the Wheeling is known for its variety of paint schemes, it was nice to see some company colors up front on 643. I wanted to get out ahead of the train in order to beat it to Hickory Junction, although road closures plus 643's promptness nearly foiled my plans. The train was creeping up on me by the time I got out of the car at Hickory, but thankfully I was able to sprint up the hill with just enough time. The black and orange pinstriping looked real nice, especially in a nearly matching pair of 3. 643 was sporting 2 corporate SD40-2s, bracketing -3 number 4000, a Brewster shop rebuild wearing a paint scheme unique to the locomotive. The green and gray SD40-2 number 6985 wasn't forgotten in Rook Yard. It has instead been positioned on the bottom end of the train, as job 643 requires a 4.5-mile shove from Hickory Junction into Mark West along the length of the Westland branch. The branch line was purpose-built only a few years prior in order to support the new Mark West facility in rural western Pennsylvania. Wheeling and Lake Erie also operates subsidiary ABC Railway, a Class 3 based out of Akron, Ohio, although the Wheeling constitutes the bulk of the 2 railroads' volume. Part of that volume is the reliable train 643 with its interesting arrangement of power on either end. As 643 creeps west through Hickory, they're preparing to pass Westland Junction, where they will reverse direction and enter the branch via an eastward-facing turnout. This is the reason that the 643 job runs with locomotives on either end, as SD40-2 6985 and its engineer will soon have control of the tank train for the 4.5-mile descent into the fuel facility. I'm just down the hill from the main line, and a hill it was, as evidenced by the track profile looking on at the bright green EMD standard cab. 6985 was a nice subject in the Pennsylvania mountains, as it still felt surreal to be chasing the wheeling. While the morning eastbound brought a large block of tanks for Westmark into Rook, this is a different cut of cars. I imagine the two companies like to keep a couple days' worth of safety stock on hand in Rook Yard, common practice among large rail customers employed in order to offset a number of factors that could quickly lead to a short supply of rolling stock. I really liked my spot on the hillside. I don't often get to see such a contrast in track altitude, and especially not on a railroad such as the Wheeling. There's really no such thing as a boring locomotive on the W&LE, as even the corporate scheme is an attractive Rio Grande-inspired black and orange, and much of the roster is composed of second-generation EMD 6-axles, with the newest being built in 1986. Following Westland Junction, the chase was on. I quickly caught up to 643 just down the road, as both of us had just ducked underneath the main line and were advancing towards Westmark. Following Westland Junction, the tracks parallel a concrete pedestrian trail through the absolutely beautiful western Pennsylvania countryside. South of the junction, there is but one other intercept point accessible for motor vehicles, and while I'm never opposed to a trackside hike, this was, after all, a train chase, meaning I did not have the luxury of getting picky with locations. That being said, this is still about the best result I could have asked for, with the colorful short line carving its way through some wonderful countryside. It was only about 11:30 in the morning, and already the day had been spectacular. As 643 wandered ever closer to Westmark, I packed my things up and said my goodbyes to the Wheeling and Lake Erie. After having wanted to chase this railroad since childhood, I was thrilled with how my morning went. I now intended to switch gears, moving from the farmland of Hickory into the heart of the Steel City. That was done so via the Fort Pitt Tunnel, which provided a very dramatic entrance into Pittsburgh city limits. While navigating the highways required utmost alertness, my railfanning luck had not run out. For about 2 years prior to this trip, I'd wanted to see a train pass through Shenley Tunnel, a tall order considering only 2 daylight trains exit the accessible tunnel portal, and one of them is Amtrak. The other train is operated by the Allegheny Valley Railroad, the exact train I quite literally stumbled upon as I made my way into Pittsburgh. I knew what had to be done and quickly aimed myself for Shenley. 4 miles in 11 minutes did not get my hopes up, but I knew I had to try. Luckily, I managed to get the jump on the AVR, with 2 of their newly acquired SD60Ms creating a beautiful echo through the tunnel as the train approached the light of day. I couldn't believe it. So far, I was 2 for 2 on bucket list items in Pittsburgh as train AVR 6 emerged from underneath the city and onto the campus of Carnegie Mellon University. The Allegheny Valley Railroad is one of 3 short lines owned by Carload Express, with the Delmarva Central based out of Delaware and the neighboring Southwest Pennsylvania Railroad. AVR operates heavily around Pittsburgh, while the SWP remains closer to the West Virginia border. The 2 railroads are separated by 30 or 40 miles and are known to share motive power with each other. I wasn't expecting to see the SD60s on today's train, but wasn't at all disappointed, as they are extremely rare beasts in 2023. They've replaced a fleet of SD45s on the AVR 6, the railroad's daily interchange train to Norfolk Southern. Ironically, AVR must use CSX trackage through Shenley to reach the thoroughbred, with interchange taking place across the Ohio River at NS's Island Avenue Yard, accessible via the famous quadruple track trench. The trench was the 3rd and final item on my Pittsburgh hit list, and I was giddily making my way after AVR 6 had cleared Shenley. My timing was interesting, however, as all of the city's colleges apparently had class changes in the same 10-minute period I was switching locations. The students quickly hustled off the streets and into their classrooms, and just as quickly I found myself alongside the Ohio River. Meandering 5 miles eventually got me to the Allegheny Commons Park, split down the middle by Norfolk Southern. It was so incredibly surreal to be standing here. Not only that, but it only took 10 minutes for the first train to show, passing by the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. sorry, make that 2 trains. If it gets better than this, I would like to know. This was the first time I can recall that I'd seen 2 trains across 4 tracks, an occurrence which wouldn't have been possible without the East Palestine derailment. The hotshot container train was rerouted over this height-restricted line as a result, passing what I assume is a regularly scheduled local. The manifest train's power was quite intriguing, led by my first RPM-4C slug, mated to one of only 13 GP59Es on the roster. The 2 trains are keeping their distance as they each navigate an interesting tangle of tracks through the burg. Looking east, the 2 inside tracks will become the Conemaugh line, traveling through coal country and making multiple connections with the Buffalo and Pittsburgh Railroad. The Conemaugh line fully joins the Pittsburgh line in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, the same PRR Pittsburgh line making up the outside tracks through the trench, which both trains are occupying. As I watched the container train travel underneath the bridge, it hit me. This is the height restriction. This bridge is the reason that all rerouted intermodal trains were single-stacked. After the train meet, I had some time to walk around the Allegheny Commons. It's a beautiful park in the middle of downtown Pittsburgh and has famously provided an excellent location for rail fans to spend time on the trench. This scene is quite foreign to me, as I have never lived near a busy main line, much less one that literally cuts a city in half. Dispatching Pittsburgh must be an intense affair, although the next train seemed to have it relatively easy, coming in from the west and continuing through the gauntlet along the Conemaugh line. Looking west from the trench, the 2 main lines join together to form the Fort Wayne line, running shoulder to shoulder with the Ohio River. This is all Pennsylvania Railroad territory, made clear by the Fort Wayne line's massive Conway Yard, approximately 20 miles upriver. Railroad crossings in Pittsburgh are few and far between, which means little horn action to provide an alert of oncoming trains. And with my scanner in the woods about 50 minutes away, I didn't have much of a heads up. But I knew something else must be close by, as the dispatcher wasted zero time lining the switches after the eastbound had cleared. Next customer at the trench was a stinky one, eastbound trash loads coming off the pit line. Well, there's the horn action I was asking for. Not sure if that was a friendly or unfriendly engineer, but either way, I'm sure they got a chuckle. This is daily train 63V out of New Jersey, taking trash from the Big Apple farther inland for processing. First trash train I'd seen, and I'd be okay if it was my last. It was definitely an odd sight, with what appeared to be 4 purpose-built containers per flat car, none of which were articulated either. Unlike the preceding train, 63V was crossing over all tracks in order to continue towards its destination of Mingo Junction, Ohio. 63V was to be my last train at the trench, as I had just one more landmark I wanted to see. Much like the W&LE, it was a sad goodbye at the Allegheny Commons, but what an awesome time it was. From downtown, I ventured southeast along the river towards Braddock, a community built up by the rise of steel. Braddock is home to U.S. Steel's massive Edgar Thomson blast furnace, an industrial facility of incredible proportions. This is what I'd come to Braddock for, as steel furnaces have always interested me for that simple reason. Unfortunately, the mills take incredible tolls on their surrounding communities, and Braddock is no exception. In fact, the town is the poster child of the sad reality these mills produce, and I almost felt bad passing through town on tourism affairs. Of course, with an operation of this scale, you can expect a gaggle of railroads to have their hand in the pot, with CSX, NS, and 2 short lines reaching into Edgar Thomson's. Much of the facility cannot be viewed from public property, although Braddock Avenue provides a few fleeting glimpses. I was mainly interested in the heavy equipment, but got to witness molten steel being poured through an uncovered fence, which was definitely the highlight. Happy I saw the mill, but saddened by its clear toll on the community, I figured a pick-me-up was in store along the Bessemer and Lake Erie. This is a Canadian National-owned short line shuttling taconite pellets from the Great Lakes into Edgar Thomson, but a drive by their yard in North Bessemer didn't produce anything interesting. I ended the day just like I started it, at the guidance of my mom, only this time in the parking lot of Primanti Brothers. Pittsburgh has so many incredible railfan opportunities for short line and Class 1 railfans alike, and I barely scratched the surface. I was overjoyed with my day's results, happy I made the drive, and was able to witness a good amount of operations I've wanted to see for years. Thank you, Mom, for suggesting I follow the smell of steel. I hope everybody enjoyed railfanning Pittsburgh as much as I did.